Michael Shepard rubbed his tired eyes and glanced at his watch once again. It was almost 1930, and he was still sitting at his desk piled high with paperwork. 15 years with the Boston Police Department, 8 of them in homicide, had turned him into a man who spent more time with the dead than the living. His thin face, with deep wrinkles around his eyes, bore the marks of sleepless nights, and his once dark brown hair was beginning to gray at the temples. Shepard had recently turned 45, but he felt 60. The phone rang suddenly, sharply breaking the evening silence of the nearly deserted department. "Shepard," the detective answered dryly. The familiar voice of Vanessa's dispatcher sounded tense. "Mike, we have a homicide. A woman has been shot outside the Pemberton Square courthouse. Uniforms have already cordoned off the scene." Shepard exhaled slowly. He was going to spend the evening watching an old baseball game and maybe a second shot of whiskey. Those plans were not going to materialize. "I'm on my way," he said shortly and stood up, picking up his worn leather jacket from the back of his chair. On the way to the scene, he thought back to his own divorce 3 years ago. Susan couldn't stand his schedule, the constant calls in the middle of the night, his aloofness after a particularly heavy case. "You're living with ghosts, Mike," she'd said the last night. Maybe she was right. He'd seen so much death in nearly 2 decades that sometimes he struggled to find the strength to empathize with the living. The blue flashers of police cars lit up the courthouse steps as Shepard parked his tattered Ford. The fence tape stretched, gawkers gathering despite the evening chill. He showed his badge to an officer and walked under the tape. The body lay at the foot of the stairs. Shepard squatted next to forensic medical examiner Roberts, an older African-American man with a tenacious gaze. "What do we got, Doc?" "Female, mid-30s, multiple gunshot wounds, preliminary at least 8 shots. Shot at close range, presumably with a 9mm. Death occurred approximately 2 to 3 hours ago." Shepard took a close look at the victim. Expensive suit, well-groomed hands with neat manicures, elegant, though blood-stained shoes. Beautiful face, now frozen in a strange look of surprise, as if she didn't believe until the last moment that this was happening to her. "You got an ID?" "Yes. Rebecca Grant, 37 years old. Lawyer at Bishop & Associates. She's got her purse, wallet, valuables. Doesn't look like a robbery." Shepard nodded, surveying the crime scene. There were papers scattered all over the place, papers that had obviously fallen out of the victim's briefcase. Among them, he noticed documents with court seals. "Looks like she was here on business," he muttered. CSI Paul Jenkins, a young man with a neat beard, approached with a clipboard in hand. "Detective, we've got some preliminary information. The victim was in court today for her divorce proceedings. According to the paperwork, today was the last day of hearings." Shepard felt a twinge inside. Divorce and murder is an all-too-common tie-in in his practice. "Husband?" "James Grant, owner of a construction company. Uniforms are looking for him." Shepard looked around the crime scene thoughtfully. It was shot here, as evidenced by the shell casings scattered on the stairs. The shooter didn't hide, didn't care about trace evidence. Emotional crime? Or so self-righteous that the killer didn't bother with evidence? He got up and walked over to the woman who sat in the police car, wrapped in a plaid blanket. Her eyes were red from crying, her hands shaking. "Detective Michael Shepard, homicide. Can you answer a few questions?" The woman nodded, swallowing nervously. "Sarah Morris. Yeah. I was with Rebecca in court. We went out together, but I came back in, forgot my phone. And when I got downstairs..." Her voice broke. Shepard had seen it many times before. Shock, disbelief, a sense of unreality. He gave her time to collect her thoughts. "Did you see who fired the shots?" No, I just heard gunshots. A lot of shots." "Tell me about Rebecca and her husband." Sarah nervously fixed her hair. They'd been married almost 10 years. They met in college. James had always been assertive, jealous. He monitored Rebecca's every move, checked her cell phone, watched who she talked to. What caused the divorce? She couldn't live like that anymore. The last 2 years had been particularly difficult. His business wasn't doing so well. He became even more irritable, raised his hand on her twice. Sarah hesitated. But James would never accept divorce. To him, it's an admission of defeat, and he always has to be the winner. "How did today's hearing go?" The judge ruled in Rebecca's favor. James was furious, screaming that she wouldn't get a dime, that she'd regret her decision. Shepard wrote down the testimony in his notebook. Classic situation, spurned husband, unable to accept the end of the relationship. Aggression, threats, and then... But something wasn't adding up. Mrs. Sarah, did James Grant leave the courthouse before you? Yes, right after the verdict was announced. He ran out, slammed the door. That was about 40 minutes before Rebecca and I left. And you didn't see him outside when you left? No, he was gone. At least not at the front door. Fascinating. Could Grant have waited for his wife somewhere nearby, or did he come back later? We should check the security footage. Sarah suddenly looked up at the detective with red eyes. Rebecca had a diary. She wrote down every threat James made, every incident of violence. Said it was her insurance policy. Do you know where it could be? Her apartment, probably. She'd recently gotten a separate place after the divorce proceedings started. Shepard nodded, making a note in his notebook. What can you tell us about Rebecca and James's marriage? How did it all start? Sarah smiled weakly as she remembered. They were the perfect couple in college. James was the star of the soccer team. Rebecca was an excellent student, president of the student council. He was always ambitious. He said he would build an empire, and he started off well. His construction company grew rapidly in the first few years. But Rebecca also had a successful career, and that annoyed him. He wanted her to leave her job and stay home. Their relationship began to deteriorate about 5 years ago when Rebecca was promoted to senior partner in a law firm. It was all building up to a familiar pattern: control, jealousy, a sense of loss of power. How many times had Shepard seen stories like this end in tragedy? When he returned to the crime scene, he found that the forensics team had collected all the shell casings, 11 of them. That's almost a full clip. The killer wanted to make sure the victim didn't survive. "Boss," Jenkins called out, "we got a witness. Says he saw a man running away right after the shots were fired. Description's pretty vague, but some of the details match James Grant's appearance. Where is he now? We don't know yet. No sign of him at his office or home. He's been reported missing." Shepard nodded and took another look at Rebecca Grant's body, which was now being placed in a bag for transport to the morgue. Check every possible place he could be hiding: relatives, friends, vacation homes, and run his accounts and credit cards. If he's on the run, we need to know where he's going. Shepard slowly walked around the crime scene, trying to visualize how it all went down. Rebecca walking out of the courthouse. Someone's waiting for her. Starts shooting almost point blank. 11 shots. Doesn't try to take the valuables. Pure rage, no calculation. James Grant was the obvious suspect. An estranged husband, a man with a history of violence who had just lost in court and possibly a significant portion of his fortune. The motive was obvious, and yet something troubled Shepard. The murder was too open, too demonstrative. It was as if the killer wanted to be caught, or wanted everything to point to a certain person. Michael sighed as he watched the body being carted away. Another ruined life, another story that wouldn't get a happy ending. And somewhere out there is a man who will be held accountable. His job is to find the culprit, whether all the clues lead to the obvious suspect or whether something more complicated is lurking. As the last police car drove away, Shepard looked once more at the courthouse steps, flooded with the red glow of the parking lights. It was symbolic that a woman seeking justice had found death at the very temple of justice. Now he had to make sure that justice was served, at least after her death. James Grant became the prime suspect in this case, a man with motive, opportunity, and a history of violent behavior. Shepard knew that finding him was the first priority. In the meantime, he had to delve into Rebecca Grant's life to find all the strings leading to her death. In his pocket was the address of her new apartment. Tomorrow, he would begin unraveling that knot. And today, he had to prepare the initial report and open a case that might be a lot more complicated than it looked at first glance. Michael Shepard took the stairs to the 4th floor. The elevator in this building hadn't worked for the 3rd day, as evidenced by the carelessly pinned notice in the entryway. Rebecca Grant's apartment was at the end of the hallway, a small 2-bedroom in a relatively quiet Boston neighborhood. Not the most expensive place for a successful lawyer, the detective noted to himself. Perhaps she didn't want to attract her husband's attention, or was saving for a protracted trial. Yellow police tape crossed the doorway. Shepard nodded to the officer on duty and stepped inside. The apartment looked almost uninhabited, minimal furniture, a few boxes still unpacked. Rebecca obviously hadn't had time to settle in. Shepard walked slowly through the rooms, absorbing the details, bookshelves of legal books and a few paperback novels, framed photos, Rebecca at prom, Rebecca with her parents, with her friends, not a single picture with her husband. It was as if she'd cut him out of her life before the divorce was official. In the bedroom, he found a neatly made bed and a stack of papers on the bedside table. Divorce papers, case notes, bills. A life suddenly cut short and left as a paper trail. In the drawer of the nightstand, Shepard found what Sarah Morris had mentioned, a diary in a black leather cover. He flipped through the pages slowly, immersing himself in Rebecca Grant's world. The first entries dated back 3 years. James was checking my phone again. When I asked why, he said he just wanted to know what time it was. His own phone was lying next to him. Today he made a scene over my delay at work, yelled that I must be seeing someone. I was just preparing papers for tomorrow's hearing. The footage grew increasingly disturbing. He threw a vase at the wall when I told him I was going to a conference in Chicago. A shard scratched my cheek. He apologized afterwards, saying he didn't mean to, that it was an accident. I found a tracker in my car. James keeps track of my movements. When I asked him, he said it was for my safety. The last recording was made the day before the murder. Tomorrow is the last hearing. I can't wait for it all to be over. Daniel says I can stay at his place if James pulls something, but I don't want to drag him into this. James is too unpredictable. Daniel, the same name mentioned in several earlier entries. Who was he? A coworker, friend, lover. In the bathroom, Shepard found a man's razor and aftershave. It didn't look like they belonged to James. Rebecca wasn't likely to keep his things here, so she must have had someone who was staying the night. Shepard's phone rang, interrupting his musings. "We found James Grant," his partner Rodriguez reported. He wasn't trying to escape. He was sitting in a bar near his office. He's at the station now, waiting to be questioned. "On my way," Shepard replied briefly, taking another look around the apartment. On the way to the station, he thought about what he had seen. The picture was clear enough. A controlling, jealous husband, a wife seeking freedom, possibly a new relationship, a classic triangle, often ending in tragedy. And yet something was bugging Shepard. If James Grant had really killed his wife in a fit of rage, why hadn't he tried to escape? Why did he sit quietly in the bar, waiting to be found? James Grant looked nothing like Shepard had envisioned him. Instead of the aggressive, red-faced man in front of him, there was a man with a droopy face and a wan gaze. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened. The only sign of tension was the white knuckles clutching a glass of water. "Mr. Grant, I'm Detective Shepard. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your wife's death." James looked up slowly. "Ex-wife," he corrected quietly. "As of yesterday, ex-wife." "Where were you yesterday between 16 and 17 o'clock?" "After the trial, I went to the office. I had to pick up some paperwork. Then I went to the Red Lion, a bar on Warren Street. I sat there until your colleagues found me." "Can anyone confirm your presence in the office?" "My secretary, Lisa. She was there until 6 o'clock, and the bartender at the Red Lion knows me. I'm a regular there." Shepard took notes, even though he knew he was on camera. "How did the trial go?" James grinned bitterly. "How do you think? She got half of everything I made in 10 years, half of the company I built from scratch." He paused. "But I didn't kill her, Detective. I loved Rebecca. Even when I hated her, I still loved her. Witnesses say you threatened her in court." "I was angry. I said some things I regret now. But from words to murder, there's a great divide I never crossed." "What about domestic violence cases?" Rebecca kept a diary of such episodes. James's face contorted. "I never hit her. Yes, there were fights. I broke things," yelled. "But I never raised a hand to her. If she wrote otherwise, it's a lie." Why would Rebecca lie in her personal journal? To win the divorce, of course. She was a smart lawyer and knew how to build a case. Shepard watched Grant's reactions carefully. He looked genuinely indignant, but didn't seem guilty. "Do you know the name Daniel?" A spark flashed in James's eyes. "Daniel Frost, A colleague of hers at the firm, young, ambitious. He paused. And her lover. Do you have proof? I saw them together several times. The way they looked at each other. The way he touched her. James clenched his fists. She denied it, of course. Said I was paranoid. But I know I'm right. Were you keeping tabs on your wife? I was protecting my marriage. Shepard decided to change tactics. Mr. Grant, we have a witness who saw a man who looks like you fleeing the scene. This witness is wrong. I was at the bar. Check the cameras, ask the bartender. James leaned forward. Look, I know how this looks. Angry husband, lost in court, perfect suspect, but I didn't kill Rebecca. He paused. You'd be better off checking out this Frost guy. Or Rebecca's clients. She's had some high-profile cases against serious people. James Grant sounded confident. His alibi sounded convincing. But Shepard knew alibis could be rigged. Still, he couldn't ignore the mention of Daniel Frost. If there really was a relationship between him and Rebecca, it opened up a new line of investigation. After the interrogation, Shepard decided not to detain Grant. There wasn't enough evidence to arrest him yet, and a qualified lawyer would have him out in 24 hours. Better to give him his freedom and monitor his actions. Don't leave town, Mr. Grant, Shepard warned. We're not done yet. The next morning, Shepard headed to the law firm Bishop & Associates, where Rebecca worked. An elegant building in the financial district, marble lobby, silent elevators, a world where suits cost as much as his monthly salary. The firm's senior partner, William Bishop, received him in a spacious office overlooking the river. The gray-haired man with aristocratic manners looked genuinely saddened by Rebecca's death. It's a terrible tragedy, Detective. Rebecca was a brilliant lawyer and a wonderful person. Tell me about her work here. She joined us 8 years ago and quickly showed her potential. She specialized in corporate law and handled some big cases. 3 years ago, she made junior partner. Did she have any enemies? Clients who might hold a grudge? Bishop thought about it. In our profession, there's always someone with a grudge. But for someone to dare to commit murder, he shook his head. The Arcadia Systems case had caused quite a stir, though. Rebecca represented a former employee who accused the company of stealing his intellectual property. The company's CEO, Victor Schein, was furious. Shepard made a note in his notebook. What can you say about her relationship with her coworkers? Everyone treated her with the utmost respect. Specifically, what about Daniel Frost? Bishop's face tensed for a moment. Daniel is a talented young lawyer. He and Rebecca have worked together on several cases. Just worked? Bishop sighed. Detective, I don't encourage office romances, but I also don't meddle in my employees' personal lives unless it affects their work. So there was something going on between them? I can't confirm anything. There were rumors, of course. They were often seen together outside the office. After talking to Bishop, Shepard asked to see Rebecca's office. A neat desk, stacks of papers, framed photos, nothing personal, nothing that could shed any light on her murder. As he left the office, he was confronted by a young man in an impeccable suit. Detective Shepard? I'm Daniel Frost. Shepard looked him over carefully. Tall, slender, with regular features and a confident look. 30 years old, no more. The type to win women's hearts easily. Mr. Frost, I've been meaning to talk to you. They're alone in an empty conference room. You're investigating Rebecca's murder, Daniel began. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Yes, and I know you were close. Daniel didn't deny it. We started dating about a year ago, after she moved out on her husband. Rebecca didn't want to publicize our relationship until after the divorce was finalized. Did her husband know? Suspected. He followed her around a few times, saw us together. One time he made a scene in a restaurant. Daniel paused. He threatened me. Said I'd be sorry if I didn't leave Rebecca alone. Why didn't you tell the police? Rebecca didn't want to complicate the divorce proceedings. She said James was just blowing off steam, that he wasn't dangerous. Where were you the day of the murder? Client meeting from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock, then at the office until 7 o'clock. Daniel looked calm, but his fingers tapped nervously on the desk. James killed her, didn't he? Did he? We're looking at all leads, Shepard answered evasively. How would you describe James Grant's character? Controlling, overbearing, no rejection. A typical narcissist who can't stand the fact that a woman has left him. And your plans with Rebecca? Were you going to continue the relationship after her divorce? Daniel's face softened. We'd talked about a future together. Not right away, of course. She needed time to come to her senses after everything she'd been through. Shepard made a few more notes in his notebook. Another suspect, another possible motive. A lover who might have been afraid Rebecca would change her mind after the divorce, or a husband unwilling to let his wife go, or someone else he didn't know about yet. James Grant's alibi check confirmed what he said. Security cameras in the office recorded his arrival at 15:45 and departure at 16:20. The bartender at the Red Lion confirmed that James showed up at about 16:30 and stayed there until late afternoon. The time of the murder was around 16:15. Theoretically, James could have had time to drive from his office to the courthouse, commit the murder, and get to the bar. But that would have been extremely risky and required perfect timing. Daniel Frost, for his part, also had a confirmed alibi, a meeting with a client witnessed by several people. The investigation hit a dead end. The two prime suspects had alibis. Both had motive, but there was no opportunity to commit the crime. Or was there? Shepard returned to the crime scene in the late afternoon. The courthouse was nearly empty, only a few guards making their rounds. He stood on the steps, trying to reconstruct a picture of what had happened. And then it was as if he saw her, Rebecca Grant, in the last moments of her life. She walks out of the courthouse, down the steps, her face a mixture of relief and anxiety. Freedom at last, but at what cost? Rebecca stops to check her cell phone. Is the message from Daniel or from someone else? She doesn't notice a figure appearing as if out of nowhere. A man in dark clothes, his face hidden by a hood. Rebecca looks up, sees a gun pointed at her. A second of recognition, shock, an attempt to say something. The first shot catches her off guard. She tries to turn away, to shield herself with her hand. But the next bullet is already embedded in her shoulder. Rebecca falls to the steps, tries to crawl away, screaming for mercy. But the killer methodically keeps firing, shot after shot until the clip is empty. The killer stands over her for a few more seconds as if he wants to make sure the job is done. Then he quickly walks away, disappearing into the hustle and bustle of the city. Who was this man? James not coming to terms with his loss? Daniel hiding some secret? Someone from Rebecca's past that Shepard didn't know about yet? Cars passed by, their headlights illuminating the detective's face for a moment. Shepard knew the answers existed. All he had to do was find the right questions. Day 3 of the investigation began for Michael Shepard with a cup of bitter black coffee and a stack of reports on his desk. The circles under his eyes testified to a sleepless night. The image of Rebecca Grant falling under a hail of bullets haunted him even in his attempts to forget himself in a short sleep. The detective rubbed the bridge of his nose and opened the folder with the results of ballistics examination, which had been delivered by courier in the early morning. The report confirmed the initial speculation. The gun had been fired from a 9mm pistol, presumably a Glock Model 17. 11 casings, all with the same characteristics, all fired from the same gun. Shepard tapped his pen on the table thoughtfully. Something was bugging him, some detail escaping his attention. A phone call snapped him out of his musings. "Shepard, I have some interesting information on the Grant case." Officer Jenkins's voice sounded agitated. "We ran a background check on registered weapons. James Grant has a license for a Glock 17, purchased 3 years ago." Shepard straightened in his chair, another piece of evidence against the husband. "Did you find the gun?" "No, he didn't have it on him. Wasn't found in the house either. He says he sold it a week ago to some collector, but he doesn't remember the name." "Very convenient amnesia," Shepard muttered. "Thanks, Jenkins. Check all the pawn stores and gun stores for used Glocks, and check the surveillance cameras in the courthouse area again. Pay particular attention to the period between 1:05 o'clock and 1:07 p.m. Hanging up the phone." The detective returned to the case file. Something still wasn't adding up. If James really did sell the gun, as he claimed, where did the gun that had been used to shoot Rebecca come from? Coincidence? Unlikely. Or was it a skillful attempt to frame him? Shepard decided to double-check Daniel Frost's alibi. There was something about the young lawyer's demeanor that made him uneasy. Answers too smooth, emotions too right. like a carefully rehearsed role. At the law firm of Bishop and Associates, Shepard wasn't as welcomed as he'd been the first time. The death of a female employee was a tragedy, but business demanded a return to normal operations. The detective asked for access to Rebecca's personal computer, which caused some resistance from management, but eventually he managed to get permission. Looking through Rebecca's work correspondence, Shepard found nothing suspicious, just business emails, reports, and documents on current cases. However, the folder of personal emails contained several messages from Daniel Frost, sent in the final weeks before Rebecca's death. The tone of these letters was different from what Frost himself had described, not a gentle lover, but rather a pushy business partner. "Rebecca, we need to have a serious talk about the Arcadia case. I understand your position, but we can't risk everything because of your moral principles. There is too much at stake. Please be reasonable. Compromise is not a defeat, but a strategic decision. Think not only of yourself, but also of us, of our future at the firm." The last message was sent the day before the assassination. "I'm sorry it's come to this. I hope you make the right decision tomorrow, for the sake of all of us." What did that mean? What decision was Frost talking about? Shepard leaned back in his chair, mulling over what he'd read. It seemed that there were not only romantic, but also professional differences between the lovers, and perhaps those disagreements were more serious than one might realize. The next step was to talk to the office manager, a short, middle-aged woman with a shrewd eye. "Mrs. Parker, what can you tell me about the professional relationship between Rebecca Grant and Daniel Frost?" The woman chose her words carefully. They worked together on several cases. Things went smoothly at first, but lately there had been some differences. "What kind of disagreement?" "The Arcadia Systems case. It was a major patent infringement suit. Rebecca represented a former employee who claimed his design was stolen. Daniel joined the case later as co-counsel. And what was the point of contention? As far as I know, Arcadia offered a generous out-of-court settlement, but with the condition of complete confidentiality. Rebecca wanted to take the case to trial. She thought publicity was more important than money. Daniel, on the other hand, insisted on accepting the offer. How could it affect their careers?" Mrs. Parker paused. In the event of a public trial and a victory, the major laurels would go to Rebecca as lead attorney. It might have secured her promotion to senior partner. If they accepted an out-of-court settlement, the major work would remain behind the scenes, and the firm would value both attorneys' contributions equally. So Daniel could have been promoted with her? Exactly. Or even instead of her, given that senior partner, Mr. Bishop, had always been particularly sympathetic to him. Back at the station, Shepard found another report on his desk, the results of the forensic analysis of Rebecca's phone. The last day of her life, she'd made several calls. To Sarah Morris, to the office, to her parents' home, and the last one to Daniel Frost just after leaving the courthouse. The conversation lasted less than a minute. Shepard immediately dialed Frost's number. "Mr. Frost, you didn't mention that you spoke to Rebecca just before she died." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Forgot. It was a brief conversation. She said the divorce was finalized and we agreed to meet tonight. And that was it? Yes, detective, no big deal. Shepard hung up the phone and thought about it. Frost was lying. It was obvious. But what exactly was he hiding? And was it related to the murder? Shepard decided to meet with James Grant again. The conversation took place in Grant's office at his construction company, a spacious room with panoramic windows and minimalist design. "Mr. Grant, what do you know about your wife's recent professional affairs?" James looked puzzled. "Not much. We haven't discussed her work in a while. All I know is that she was involved in some big case against a technology company." "Arcadia Systems?" "Yeah, I think so. She was very passionate about the case, thought it was very important." "You said you knew about her relationship with Daniel Frost?" Grant's face contorted. "I did. Not right away, of course. At first I just suspected. Then I hired a private investigator who took some pictures of them leaving the restaurant together, holding hands." He paused. "But you know what's strange? When I followed them myself, their relationship looked different. There was no warmth. They were more like business partners than lovers." Shepard was watching Grant closely. Maybe he just didn't want to admit the obvious. Or was he telling the truth? That same evening, the detective got a call from Jenkins. "Boss, we got something interesting with the cameras." At 16 hours and 5 minutes, a black SUV with tinted windows enters the courthouse parking lot. 10 minutes later, it drives away quickly. The license plate is partially visible, matches a car registered to Arcadia Systems. Who was driving? Unfortunately, we can't see, but we checked it out. It's the company car of the CEO of the company, Victor Shine. Shepard's been thinking, a new suspect or another coincidence? Returning to the Arcadia Systems investigation, Shepard discovered that shortly before Rebecca Grant's death, the court had set a date for a final hearing. She was killed on the exact day she was supposed to decide whether to settle out of court or continue the litigation. Another detail caught the detective's attention. The case involved documents that Rebecca was about to present in court, evidence of systematic patent infringement by Arcadia Systems, affecting not only her client, but many other inventors as well. These documents could cause irreparable damage to the company's reputation and lead to multi-million-dollar lawsuits. Shepard decided to follow up on another lead. He requested Daniel Frost's financial records and discovered that a week before the murder, a large sum of money had been deposited into his account from an anonymous source. Frost attributed it to online poker winnings, but there was no corroboration. All the threads of the investigation were slowly being woven into a cohesive picture. Shepard assembled his team for a final briefing. "We have 3 prime suspects," he began, pinning photos to the board. James Grant, husband of the victim motive. Jealousy, anger over divorce and property division. Daniel Frost, co-worker and alleged lover motive. Career ambition, possibly financial gain. And Victor Shine, CEO of Arcadia Systems motive, avoiding public scandal and financial loss. Shepard moved closer to the board. "Now let's look at the facts. Grant had a registered gun of the same type that killed Rebecca, but claims he sold it. He has an alibi, but it's not 100%. In theory, he could have had time to commit the murder." He shifted his gaze to Frost's photograph. Frost had lied about the nature of his relationship with Rebecca and had concealed their last conversation. In addition, he had a motive to prevent her from bringing the Arcadia Systems case to trial, as it could interfere with his career advancement. Finally, he pointed to a photograph of Shane. Shane was near the crime scene at the time of the murder. His company could have suffered huge losses because of Rebecca's actions, but we have no evidence of his direct involvement. Shepard paused, giving the information a chance to settle in the minds of his colleagues. However, there is one other fact that changes everything. He pulled the results of the gunpowder particle analysis out of a folder. On the seized clothes of James Grant, found microscopic traces of gunpowder, identical to that used in the cartridges for the murder. We found these traces on the cuff of the shirt he was wearing on the day of the murder. There was silence in the room. "But how does that fit with his alibi?" one of the detectives asked. "It doesn't, if we believe the security footage. But what if the cameras are lying?" Shepard put another report on the table. The technical experts found that the camera footage from Grant's office had been tampered with. Someone had very skillfully replaced the actual video with a pre-made snippet. Same thing with the bar footage. They just time-stamped the old footage. "But why go to all that trouble?" another detective asked. "Why not just go into hiding after the murder?" "Because he wanted the perfect alibi. Grant is a man used to being in control. He couldn't afford to get caught. So he cooked up an elaborate scheme, switched records, made it look like he was in other places while he killed his wife." "What about the gun?" "We won't find it. He probably disposed of it right after the murder. But you can't fool the powder particles." The team started preparing a warrant for James Grant's arrest. Shepard knew the case wasn't completely closed yet. There was a trial coming up where all the evidence would be scrutinized. But he was sure he was on the right trail. When Shepard arrived at Grant's house with the arrest warrant, the man didn't look surprised. He calmly allowed himself to be handcuffed and only asked, "How did you expose me?" "Gunpowder," Shepard replied. "You forgot to change your shirt." Grant grinned bitterly. "Such a small thing. I thought I'd thought of everything." On the way back to the station, he finally confessed. "I couldn't let her go to him. Not after 10 years of marriage. Not after everything I'd done for her." his face contorted in pain. You know what the ironic thing is? He and Frost weren't even real lovers. It was staged to make me jealous, to hurt me more. I found out the day before the divorce, followed them to her apartment. They weren't kissing, they weren't hugging. They were just discussing how best to use my jealousy in court. And that was the final straw? Yeah, I could handle cheating, but I couldn't stand the fact that she made a joke out of me, used my feelings against me. James Grant was arrested and brought to trial. New details emerged at the trial. It turned out that Daniel Frost had indeed received money from Arcadia Systems, not for killing Rebecca, but for trying to convince her to accept an out-of-court settlement. He was not her real lover, but used the sham relationship to advance his career at the firm, to become closer to the lead attorney, to take over her cases, and possibly to take her place. Victor Shine, Arcadia's CEO, was indeed nearby, but only because he was trying to meet with Rebecca in person and offer her even more favorable settlement terms. When he heard gunshots, he left in a panic for fear of being implicated in the scandal. Sarah Morris, Rebecca's best friend, was a key witness for the prosecution, recounting the years of psychological abuse James had subjected his wife to. A year passed. Michael Shepard stood at Rebecca Grant's grave with a small bouquet of wildflowers. Next to him was Sarah Morris, who had become a close friend to him after all the events. James has been sentenced to life in prison without parole, Shepard said. Justice had been served, but at what cost? Sarah nodded. What about the others? Daniel Frost was fired from the firm when his role in this whole thing came to light. As far as I know, he left Boston, started over somewhere on the West Coast. Shepard was silent for a moment. The Arcadia Systems case did go to trial. Another lawyer had brought it to trial, using the materials Rebecca had gathered. The company lost and paid a huge settlement. Sarah smiled weakly. Rebecca would have wanted that. She had always fought for justice. They stood by the grave for a moment longer, and then walked slowly toward the cemetery exit. You know, Michael, the thing that struck me most about this story was how people used each other. James saw Rebecca as his property. Daniel saw her as a means to advance his career. Even Victor Sheehan tried to manipulate her for the company's interests. Shepard nodded. I deal with that all the time in my work. People view others as tools, not individuals. And when the tool no longer serves their purposes... He didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah nodded understandingly. What will you do next? She asked. The same thing I've always done. Unravel new cases, seek justice for those who can no longer stand up for themselves. Shepard smiled sadly. That's my job. They walked out of the cemetery gates, and Shepard turned around, casting one last glance at Rebecca Grant's grave. Another case closed, another story finished. But no matter how many killers he caught, it would never bring life back to those who had been so cruelly deprived of it. And that was the bitterest truth of his profession.